Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I am not lying when I say I'm doing fantastic, because we're going to discuss something that has been in the cultural zeitgeist for years, and it finally came up in a situation that felt appropriate, and then we decided to expound upon it, to expand the conversation to a full episode. So that makes me feel pretty good, and it's a fun topic. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for asking. I am excited as well. This is a refreshing departure from some of the heavier true crime content that we will put on this channel occasionally. And this one is a mystery. It's definitely mysterious, and it's culture related. So we're checking like 2 out of 3 of the boxes here: crime, culture, mystery. So we're talking about The Simpsons today, and The Simpsons is a TV show that's been running since 1989. In popular culture, there are stories of how The Simpsons has predicted the future.
Yes, and you just said it's been running since 1989. It was debuted on December 17th, 1989, and it's hit almost 730 episodes. And that has been how many seasons?
33 seasons.
33 seasons. We need to think about that for a second. 33 seasons. Season 34, I believe, is debuting on September 25th of this year.
That's a lot of episodes. And each episode, Lance, is 21 to 24 minutes. It fits into that half-hour time frame on television where there's commercials that bring it out to a half an hour. But it also started on the Tracy Ullman Show back in 1987, which predated the actual TV show The Simpsons, which is, I guess, technically a bit of a spin-off of the Tracy Ullman Show into its own thing.
And since then, it has become the longest-running animated series in America. It's become the longest-running sitcom in America and the longest-running scripted primetime television series in America. Let's just talk about that for a second. How many shows have you watched that just kind of tap out at like 6 seasons, 8 seasons?
If they're lucky, they get that far.
Now, The Simpsons have an advantage because they're animated. They have characters that don't age, and they have the liberties to have plot lines that don't really need to come together. But how many animated shows have lasted more than 10 seasons? Just a handful.
Yeah, really not many. I don't know. How long has Family Guy lasted?
Family Guy's been around for probably 17 years.
Yeah, 21 seasons of Family Guy.
I'm sorry, 21 years of Family Guy?
Well, I don't know about years, but seasons at least. Because I think they were actually off the air for a period of time. But to your point, animation, a lot easier to achieve some longevity with, and specifically on Fox, too. Both those shows have run on Fox for all those seasons.
And I remember being a young lad, a young buck, back in the day when The Simpsons came out, and we're talking the late 80s, 1989 to the early 90s, and we didn't have cable television. We didn't have streaming service, didn't even know what that was. Didn't have cable television, so we did not have the Fox network that aired The Simpsons. So me and my sister would go up to our neighbor's house, and we would watch The Simpsons with them every Sunday night.
I do remember those days when it first started. It was a very big deal. And yeah, I was about 7 or 8 or something like that as well. And I also remember the Bart Simpson t-shirts getting banned from my elementary school. I remember wearing one that I owned. I think I owned 2 Bart Simpson t-shirts, and I had to turn one inside out when I wore it to school because it had apparently been banned and I couldn't wear it again.
See, we haven't even touched upon that sort of like cultural impact that The Simpsons had. Like, they were threatened. The establishment was threatened by a yellow cartoon character with spiky hair that said, "Don't have a cow."
Yeah, I think the shirt I had said, "I'm Bart Simpson and who the hell are you?"
Yeah. Oh, God.
But yes, I mean, honestly, it's very innocent when you look back at it through the lens of 2022.
Right?
And so this idea came to us, I feel like, in two different ways. We've been covering weird stories lately, and we've done several episodes about that where we'll touch on 3 to 5 stories from the news, current stories that are a bit out there, you know, sort of culturally bizarre to make the news. And we also interviewed Gary Lachman, who wrote a book called Dreaming Ahead of Time. And you asked him, Lance, what he thought of The Simpsons making these predictions.
What's your thoughts on The Simpsons and them predicting the future? Is it just that they're so woven into the fabric of our culture that it's impossible for them to not have some of these moments? But it's remarkable. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, maybe they didn't predict. Maybe they made it happen. Synchromisticism. Who knows? Maybe it all goes down to The Simpsons. There's Homer, it's like there's Homer and Jethro, but is Homer the beginning of Western, literature and all that? So I often wonder if that is that what it's about there. There's some situation in The Simpsons that can account for all situations out in life, something along those lines. You can find some comment on every aspect of life in The Simpsons.
And he nailed the answer. And I asked him as the very last question of that interview because it didn't occur to me until the end that this idea that had been percolating in my brain, there was only a handful of people that could answer it in the way that it deserved to be answered. And Gary Lachman is like the number 1 or number 2 person that I would want to answer that question. He's got his finger on the pulse of this mysticism, esoteric, cultural fabric, or what am I looking for?
Ideas, really.
Energy.
Yeah. He very much loves the stuff that you can't actually grab.
Right. And he said, he kind of lit up and he said, well, did they predict these things or did they influence them to happen? Boom. What a great concept. What a great answer.
And an episode was born.
Yeah, exactly. He also equated loosely Homer Simpson to Homer, arguably the original storyteller who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And he thought that there might have been some connection there, some loose affiliation, that everything is derived from The Simpsons. Almost like an unintentional, self-fulfilling prophecy where they name him Homer and then they see that it's starting to happen and it just becomes ironic that he's named Homer. They make him into sort of, The Simpsons is like a play on simpleton, that it's like a simple name, a simple everyday family. And the irony that the patriarch of the family would be named Homer after the great Homer who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey was sort of the joke.
Right.
As things started to play out with these prophetic moments in their episodes, maybe they are looking back on it and saying, well, that was absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I mean, there could be no better name for him. And he is kind of a dummy in the show, but, sort of things end up working out for him in a lot of ways. So we wanted to take a look at the times where The Simpsons made some random predictions that eventually came true, or at least ended up on articles that claimed The Simpsons were making predictions.
There have been several articles that have these lists that are broken down to the episodes. The one that we've been working off of the most kind of compiles them all together. It's joe.co.uk. Tim, you took it one step further and you put together a document where you rated them 1 to 10 based on the level of how prophetic you considered them to be, the predictions to be.
Yeah, I kind of came up with the scale. I didn't name the scale, but I thought it was fun to try to rank these moments, or I guess like prophetic jokes or whatever you want to call them, from The Simpsons that eventually kind of came true or came close to coming true in some way.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And there's one that came up on a few lists. It's about Lady Gaga performing at the Super Bowl. And it was from an episode in 2012 called Lisa Goes Gaga, season 23, episode 22. And Lady Gaga visited Springfield and performed her songs while flying over the audience and performing at this halftime show. And then in 2017, Lady Gaga actually performed at the real Super Bowl halftime show. And was lifted into the air above the audience at one point.
And you rank this a 1 out of 10. So I'm assuming that a 1 is the lower score, the 10 being the higher score. And I can see why you did that. Break that down for me.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought if you're the writers from The Simpsons and you're coming up with a Super Bowl performer, Lady Gaga's one of the most famous people in music at that point that they wrote that episode. And, you know, of course, she'd be asked to perform at the Super Bowl at some point, as most of these, you know, A-list musicians eventually are. And of course, she's going to be lifted above the audience. I don't think that's anything special. I feel like that would happen at most shows. I mean, 50 Cent was hanging upside down at the last Super Bowl halftime show. You know, like it's pretty random, but there's always some acrobatics at stake here when the Super Bowl halftime show happens, because it's such a grand scale.
Right, and I think that the scale of the Super Bowl halftime show was taken to another level after 2001, and then moving forward, it seemed like every halftime performance, well, I guess you could say like starting with Michael Jackson's performance, but then it just was like this thing has to go to another level. So by 2012, when this episode aired, who was the biggest star at the time? You're right, Lady Gaga, and then they don't have to be very specific with what she did. So flying over the stadium feels like realistic and probably something that other performers had done in the past. So I'm with you on the 1 out of 10. She was the biggest star at the time. Super Bowl halftime show is the biggest event, entertainment-wise, at the time, even now. So not so much like they predicted the future. Now, if you were to take it back to their early episodes in the early 90s, and let's say they predicted, you know, Prince's performance or something like that in the rain, like he performed in the rain that year, I would say that would be more like a 6 or 7 for me. But they didn't do that.
I don't know. I'm going to be very tough on these grades. So I would have given that maybe like a 3, though, just because he had a song called Purple Rain. Of course, they're going to depict him playing in the rain.
Good call. Good call. Yeah.
Okay, and now there's one about Siegfried and Roy, and some of our younger listeners may not remember this duo who worked with tigers. They were famously Las Vegas performers who worked with tigers. Unfortunately, one of them was attacked. Roy was actually attacked and nearly mauled to death by a tiger, a 7-year-old white tiger. In The Simpsons, they depict this very moment, basically, before it happened.
And it's a tragic, awful story about Roy being attacked by the tiger. Both Siegfried and Roy have since passed. You ranked this as a 4 out of 10. I'm giving it a 4. I might give it a 3, because I think every time I watched any act by Siegfried and Roy, not live, of course, it was always something televised or like a promo, it occurred to me every single time that tiger is going to attack them. I mean, I was surprised when the tiger didn't attack them. It's a tiger.
In the Simpsons episode, the tiger attacked both of them. So that's one thing that's a little off about this prediction. And yeah, I also don't think it's a great prediction, hence the grade of a 4, because it's kind of an obvious one. Like it didn't, you know, it didn't take a psychic, you know, it didn't take a crystal ball to predict this one, that 2 performers performing with a wild animal were eventually going to get attacked. People had been saying this for years about Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, before he was attacked by a stingray. So I just think this was eventual.
Yeah. You ranked the Higgs boson particle prediction lower than the Siegfried and Roy attack, and I'm really surprised at that.
Yeah, okay, this is a good one to get into. So I went down the rabbit hole a little bit on this one, more than any other in particular, I guess, prediction or whatever you want to call it, from The Simpsons. So in The Simpsons, they did predict this Higgs boson particle equation. In Season 8, Episode 1, Homer is a 1998 episode. And Homer predicted it on a chalkboard. But it wasn't until 2013 that scientists actually discovered proof of the Higgs boson in a very expensive experiment. Now, the thing about this that is crazy, because no one had predicted this equation publicly, really. Maybe people in math circles, science or mathematics circles, I guess, must have, because the Daily Mail reported that Simpsons writer David X. Cohen contacted an old high school friend named David Sheminovich, who happened to be an astronomer at Columbia University, who gave the Simpsons writer this prediction for this episode. So it didn't really come from the writer's room at all. It came from an astronomer from Columbia University. And now that's an incredible prediction, though, because he kind of got it right.
So the episode aired in 1998, and if the research that I did briefly, let that be known, briefly, the first faint signals of the particles that this Higgs boson is connected to was recorded in data in 2012. So even the person that consulted for this, I guess, storyline still had something going on research-wise that put them in the know about something that was going to happen over a decade later.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind-bending to me because the Higgs boson particle is also known as the God particle, and they didn't even know it existed at all until 2012 or 2013. Right. So it was predicted in 1964 by Professor Peter Higgs and a few other physicists, but it wasn't actually proven. So, I mean, I wonder how many other astronomers, mathematicians actually had equations that they worked on that could have been right, or maybe even closer than what this fellow David X. Cohen, what his old friend David Sheminovich found out or predicted.
Now, how cool is that? Now we're uncovering that these predictions aren't just this happenstance moment or them just having their ear to the grindstone or having their ear to the road on what's coming down the path in every element of life. They have the door is open for people to come in and use The Simpsons as a delivery mechanism to give people information in the form of a animated television sitcom.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. I mean, so it goes to show that apparently the writer's room was aware of the potential effect that the show could have in pop culture, and they wanted to add some Easter eggs, I guess. You know, I mean, this is kind of nothing more than an Easter egg, not a prediction at all.
Yeah.
And now The Simpsons also sort of predicted Donald Trump's presidency. And I don't want to get too political about this, but I did think that was a pretty weird one. It was an episode from 2000 called Bart to the Future.
Okay, so in the year 2000, Donald Trump was in the, I hate saying the word again, but it's the only word I can think of, this cultural zeitgeist. He was a staple. He had made his mark on real estate. Everyone knew Donald Trump. I can see them looking at a high-profile figure like him, always in there. He was still is a media whore. This one kind of feels obvious to me.
Yeah, I think so as well. And he was even teasing, a run years before he actually did. I remember watching the roast of Donald Trump from Comedy Central, and that aired, I think, in 2011. And there's several jokes about him running for president there. So this was a thing that was known culturally long before he actually attempted a run. So I'd have to say this one's pretty low. And one funny thing from that episode was that Lisa Simpson is actually president in the episode, which is like pretty much a dream for Bart. Lisa says,
"As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump."
You say that probably for every president, but it's just pretty funny.
Every president comes in and says, "I've inherited a mess," but it is like weirdly specific.
So that was a pretty good one. I gave that a 5 out of 10 just because it was a little bit more than random on that, I thought.
Yeah, I could see that. I 4 or 5 out of 10.
Yeah, 4 is probably better.
I think The Simpsons are just so in tune with what is coming up next, just based on the creators and the longevity that they've had. Like, for example, on your list here is the merging or the purchasing of Fox by Disney. like the Fox Disney merger. You gave that a 1 out of 10. I would totally agree with that because you have The Simpsons being on Fox and Disney owns everything anyway. So what's the prediction there? That's more sort of just like a business forecast.
Yeah, it's really just a joke. It's like a writer's joke. Oh, two big, huge companies are going to merge at some point in the future. Like, put that on a headline every single day. And you know what I mean? Like, that's not a prediction. So 1 out of 10 for that one.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Here's a good one from season 21, episode 12. It was from a 2010 episode of The Simpsons called Boy Meets Curl. And in the episode, Marge and Homer compete in curling at the Vancouver Olympics, and they beat Sweden for the gold medal. What's weird about this is it did happen that only 8 years later, the U.S. did actually win the gold medal over Sweden in the Winter Olympics for curling, which pretty random because I don't believe USA has ever won a gold medal for curling before that.
And I don't really remember when I started to be aware of curling, but this episode aired in 2010, and it might have been right around that time when curling was like, remember first hearing about that? Oh, that's a weird sport to be in the Olympics. And does this even take any effort? And then when you break down like the actual sport of curling, it does take quite a bit of skill and I guess concentration. But the specificity of Sweden, I guess, isn't that strange to me either, because I mean, they were known for that.
Yeah, it's a good story. You know, it ended up being a good story. So that one kind of stuck out as a pretty good prediction based on the beating Sweden, I think. Really comes down to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1995, The Simpsons produced an episode called Lisa's Wedding, which sort of depicted FaceTime. It predicted Lisa's wedding that was supposed to happen in 2010. And again, this episode was from 1995, so a full 15 years into the future, the Simpsons writers were forecasting here. And there was a scene where Marge pops up on a smartphone-like device, and she's in full video. And it wasn't until 2010 that Apple announced that it developed FaceTime. This also happened in 1995. This episode happened long before Skype had been invented. However, I don't feel like these kind of predictions by The Simpsons are very good at all, because you're essentially just like creating like a device in a science fiction movie or something like that. And that stuff comes true all the time. Like Star Trek, you know, we could do another episode on this, on the technology that Star Trek predicted. And of course, these things are going to get invented at some point.
Absolutely. I do appreciate the fact that they incorporated these things into The Simpsons, especially the technology, the smartwatch and the FaceTime, the video calls. But we know that the people who created this and the writers, they're very educated, and they know that 1984, the book existed. That was published in 1949, and there were very similar, and Brave New World, like there was very similar uses or very similar technological developments that were put into place in these pieces of literature that I would imagine the creators and the writers of The Simpsons would know about. So it's just kind of taking that device and incorporating it into the plot of The Simpsons. They had the benefit of being very popular, and they're still very popular, but they had the benefit of existing in a time when they were right before this iPhone, smartphone, personal like laptop, tablets. Like they were right at that starting point. So when you look back in history, it does look like they were, if not influencing it, but predicting it. But it just takes a little bit of a further look back to say, well, they were influenced by something too.
Right. And I just think there's a lot of writers on the show. So per Google, as of May in 2022, 151 people have been credited with writing or co-writing at least one episode. And they have about 16 writers regularly. So as we already discussed, one of them had a very good friend who was an astronomer at Columbia. I'm pretty sure a lot of these writers are very smart people. They know very smart people. And if they've got a question like, okay, well, we're doing an episode 15 years into the future, what should we do about that? What technology should we show? There's 15 really smart people who are bouncing ideas off of each other in that room. Of course they're going to come up with some stuff, or they're going to ask their friends who might be inventing some of those things.
Absolutely. Because they want to make sure that they stay current. Maybe that is the downside of creating and developing and successfully producing a animated show, is that they have to use other devices like staying current with technological developments, cultural developments to keep people watching.
Yeah, interesting point there. And I really like this one, Lance. It's about the invention of the tobacco plant. And it's from season 11, episode 5 in 1999. Homer uses nuclear energy to create a hybrid tomato and tobacco plant called the tobacco. And so it actually inspired a fellow named Rob Bauer in 2003 to create his own plant that was grafted together from a tomato stem and a tobacco root. And so he actually apparently made contact with the writers for The Simpsons, who invited him to their offices to try the tobacco fruit for themselves. But this one worked in the other way. This one worked in the opposite way. This guy saw the episode and then created it.
See, that's a really great example of how they're influencing people. Like Gary Lockman said, maybe this is more along the lines of them influencing as opposed to predicting, and it's happened more often times than we're aware of.
I think that's more common than we know, for sure. And here was one from 1994, season 6, episode 8. Now, this is kind of on the technology topic, I guess, but they've predicted smartwatches and things like that. But again, I'm not very impressed with that, because I think that was going to come at some point no matter what. However, back in 1994, they seem to have predicted autocorrect, which is a little bit more random to me. Now, so on an iPhone-ish device, in this episode, someone writes with a stylus pen on this device, "beat up Martin," but then it autocorrects to "eat up Martha." So just kind of it's just a straight up autocorrect joke at this point, ducking, whatever you want to say. Autocorrect is still a problem today, and but it also is a great tool too.
Absolutely, and I think that you were right in ranking this one among the higher ones, 7 out of 10, because there is very little frame of reference. There is very little to look back at. During that time, there's Microsoft Word might have had the identifier if you spelled something wrong, but the option to autocorrect wasn't there. So there had to have been some forethought there from the writers to say that that a computer was automatically changing something to what they thought was correct, as opposed to what you were writing.
Right.
So yeah, that's high. That's high on my list too.
Now here's one that ranks very high as well. It's from season 2, episode 18. And it's about the Beatles, the famous rock band, the Beatles. And so in this 1991 episode, Ringo Starr was answering fan mail that had been written to him decades ago. Okay, so the joke kind of being that the Beatles got so much fan mail that it's taken decades to reply to all of it. But in September of 2013, 2 Beatles fans from Essex in the UK received a reply from Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles, to a letter and a recording that they sent to the band 50 years before. And the recording and the letter was sent to a London theater that the band was due to play at, but it was apparently found years later in a car trunk. it was basically sold, and the letter was found by a historian who apparently got that letter to the Beatles or to McCartney, who actually wrote the reply in 2013 to these fans from 50 years earlier.
Now, I think that is a very good example. I wouldn't have put it that high, an 8 out of 10. I might have given that a 6, just because the Beatles are obviously the most iconic rock band in history. They have been around forever. At the time, all of them except John Lennon were alive when that episode aired, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
So they were still relevant. They're still relevant today. I can see that topic, that storyline maturing in the writer's room. I could see that becoming it, but maybe more of a coincidence.
Yeah, I could see that too, and maybe some of these are coincidences. I mean, there's no psychics on staff at the Simpsons that we know of. Yeah, I mean, the joke was kind of obvious back in 1991. The Beatles are still answering fan mail, right? But the weird part is that there was a fan or a couple of fans who got a letter from a Beatle, Paul McCartney, after sending their letter 50 years before. So I feel like that one actually, I mean, it actually nailed it, like nail on the head, nailed it.
Yeah. It's fun to consider that 50 years, like half a century, and then your response comes, and I mean, they didn't have to pick the Beatles, right? Like they could have picked the Rolling Stones, they could have picked Pink Floyd, they could have picked any band that had some longevity to them. Pretty remarkable.
Pretty good one there.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And I really like the one about the London Shard, Lance, which
yes.
Is a building that I have never seen with my own two eyes, but it exists in London now. It started to be built in 2009. But there was an episode, it was actually that Lisa's wedding episode from 1995, season 6, episode 19. And they show a shot of Big Ben during Lisa's trip to London, the big Tower Bridge, actually. And there is a building in the London skyline that is pretty much unmistakable. As the article from The Insider notes, it does look eerily similar to the Shard, and it's even in pretty much the exact location.
This one, there's no question in my mind. I mean, this is not, it feels like it's not accidental. It feels like they had the blueprints for this building when they made this episode and they animated it in, because it's like nearly identical. This one is like a 9 out of 10 for me. It's literally located in the exact spot that you would see it in pictures, right next to London Bridge. It's the same triangular shape. It even has like the top part that's got like I don't know what it is in the actual building, but at the top there are like these two like Batman ears that come up. It's even got that in this image from The Simpsons. It's weirdly specific.
It really is. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I can't explain this one.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the picture, like the stills from The Simpsons, and then look at pictures of the Shard, and its proximity to London Bridge is exact.
Yeah. It is a little bit eerie, a little bit goosebump inducing. Yeah, I agree with that. That is a weird one. Definitely ranked as the highest prediction or coincidence or whatever you want to call it on my list.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with this at all. Can't explain it. Well, additionally with this, there's even like the buildings that are next to it are the same as the buildings that are next to the Shard.
That was a wild one, yeah.
I will say, as far as like the technological ones, you have Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, and he also created the show Futurama. So he's got something tapped into like that science background. Like you had mentioned, there was a ton of mathematicians that worked on the show. So he's got an in, he's in that world. So he's definitely utilizing his experience, his network, and his knowledge in that particular field.
Yeah,
but
for
again,
sure.
Doesn't explain the Shard.
No, it doesn't explain all these for sure. I mean, some of them I think you can definitely explain away. And here's one that is pretty hard to explain away, I'd say. And it's from a 1993 episode from season 4, episode 21. And there was a pandemic that was in the episode, and it was called the Osaka Flu. And it had originated from a different country before it made its way to the U.S. And in the episode, they didn't have a treatment available immediately. And so the doctors were asking people to get some bed rest as a way to treat this. And then that one combined with the murder hornets, which was something that really happened. But in this same episode, there was a killer bees box that had arrived, and it was pointed out by the crowd of people who were upset about this pandemic. They pointed out this box, this truck apparently that was holding killer bees, and the crowd knocked the truck over and it released a swarm of killer bees. So while it didn't predict COVID-19 or murder hornets, it really ran right up against sort of both of those things, like 20 years before it happened.
It is kind of remarkable that we bring up murder hornets and COVID, and this is all in the year that so much crazy shit happened in 2020. So I feel like 2020, 2019, 2020, 2021, like anything you could really just lay out all of the things that happened in those years, maybe even extend it out a couple years on either side. And The Simpsons, it's like a buffet for The Simpsons at that point. Like, because in 2020, the concept of The Simpsons predicting the future was already out there. Now you can start looking for things, especially in a couple of year period where so much crazy shit happened.
Right.
But I get it. Like, an outbreak, murder hornets, killer bees, all of that happened within this 1 year period. And looking back at The Simpsons, like, they nailed it.
And but I think this is my favorite, Lance, from 1999. It's from an episode called They Saved Lisa's Brain, Season 10, Episode 22. Homer has a conversation in the bar with astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, who mentions that Homer has a theory of a donut-shaped universe.
Your theory of a donut-shaped universe is intriguing, Homer. I may have to steal it.
Wow, I can't believe someone I never heard of is hanging out with a guy like me.
Which actually went on to become a real theory, which I had to peek down the rabbit hole a little bit at this one. And there's several articles about this. You can find an article saying that it probably isn't shaped like a donut, or it probably is shaped like a donut. But essentially, the idea is that our cosmos may be connected and that space is closed in on itself, but in a three-dimensional way. This is kind of a hard one for me to grasp and to explain without just reading things that make sense to me. So basically saying that the universe isn't just flat, it's actually more of a three-dimensional thing, and it actually apparently resembles the shape of a donut to some astrophysicists.
Well, I know that there's plenty of astrophysicists and people of science who watch The Simpsons, so this could be a really good example of them being influenced by this moment. Homer classically loves donuts, so having him talk with Stephen Hawking about something like this and having the subject of donuts come up is funny. So I mean, do you just imagine someone of science, an astrophysicist watching this and thinking to themselves, well, maybe this isn't such a bad theory to put into motion, even on an experimental level. And then it gains momentum because it does have some merit. Yeah. Surprisingly, does have some merit. I wonder if this is one of those, again, where the very wise Simpsons writers relied on some actual physicist or someone, and they asked. But the part about it to me that is funny or maybe too random to believe that Homer and donuts, they're synonymous together. For
that to have been a joke that actually resembled what scientists were studying is the random thing for me. So, but I wonder if they reached out to a physicist friend of theirs or something like that, or, some kind of researcher, and asked them if there's any merit to the universe, being in the shape of a donut. And they said, well, actually, maybe. I don't know. I just don't know where that line ends, where the Simpsons writers are going to ask people that they know, or just consultants.
Yeah, right. That's a great point. At some point, you need to, well, I guess when you've been going on for so many years, you've really established a lot of avenues and resources for storylines. Yeah,
and I'm sure you have a lot of friends and people who are willing to help, but also just sheer volume, 728 episodes that have been produced by The Simpsons over 33 seasons, and a lot of the, I guess, segments or jokes in The Simpsons are very quick, and they're told over the course of like a minute, where they take this minute little, I guess, rabbit hole to tell this joke, and then they'll come back to the overall story. So there's more than just 728 random storylines in those episodes. You know what I mean? There's more, like several thousand, or even more. So I guess when you look at it like it's a numbers game like that, they were bound to hit on some of these things at some point.
And I really believe that they have embraced their reputation of predicting the future at this point, because now there is evidence of them actually trolling people with the the Super Bowl scores. They worked in the Patriots Super Bowl score into a rerun episode, by replacing the score of the teams that were playing with the New England score.
So they went back and changed it based on what happened in real life?
As we were looking into this episode, there's an article that reveals that they trolled the Falcons fans. There was an episode that aired where the sports teams played, and I think the episode was called Boston. It was season 28. The Boston Americans beat the Springfield Atoms, and the Boston Americans looked very similar to the Patriots and Bill Belichick. And they replaced the score in the background with the famous Patriots score, the 34-28 score. So they're using the predictions now. So you see that thumbnail out there, and if people aren't aware that that's a troll job, then there's like a spot-on prediction of the score.
Right. Yeah. Apparently they started doing that when they had predicted that Washington would win the Super Bowl in one season, which did happen in the early 90s. And then apparently they went back when they re-aired that episode and put different Super Bowl winners. So, definitely fooling around with us a little bit here, fooling around with us, the viewers.
But hey, this has been a fun conversation. I'm glad that we've got it out of our system a little bit, because it felt like it was necessary to elaborate and unpack it a bit more after speaking with Gary Lockman. It's a fun hybrid between what the Simpsons have become since they started on the Tracy Ullman Show, how they've become so woven into our cultural fabric, and they're aware of that. And it's not like they're doing any harm by maybe trolling some of these predictions, in a sense, perpetuating them for the fun of the whole thing. But on the other hand, it's also kind of comforting to know that the Simpsons have always been there, and they'll probably always be there. Even if the show stops, there'll still be reruns, syndication. So it's just an innocent thought experiment to have.
It is. And guess what? They're going to make some more predictions based on the episodes they've already produced. And that's a promise. Things that haven't happened yet in this world here in 2022 will have been depicted on the show from episodes that were produced pre-2022. You can bank on it.
Imagine if they had an episode where it was two podcasters talking about a long-running animated TV show.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Nope.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. This has been a lot of fun. And if we forgot anything, please let us know in the comments. And we really appreciate you listening.
See you in Springfield.